I know I'm queer, I know I'm attracted to women, and I believe that there is a God that loves me regardless. And so for me, it's just kind of walking that out every day.
From a Christian perspective, sex doesn't make sense outside the context of marriage.
And they were just like, no girls watch that. And I was just like, I watched porn. And it was just like silence.
Sex. It's a taboo topic in households throughout the country, but when you belong to a religious community, there's often strict rules around things like porn, chastity, homosexuality, and even masturbation.
Whenever the temptation came, I don't think I'd ever have sex before marriage, because I think this is something that's left for marriage. I mean, if you don't leave sex for marriage, what exactly are you leaving?
Aussie teens are less likely than ever before to be religious, but for those who are devout, how do they deal with the social pressures to be sexually active? I'm Siobhan and I'm a religion and ethics reporter for the ABC. And I want to find out how young people of faith handle sex and dating, especially when their religious beliefs are at odds with their sexual desires. And that is something that writer and actor GEMMA Bird-Matheson has grappled with since she became a Christian in her teens.
I had a hard time in high school for a number of reasons and family stuff. I had a friend in grade 8 who was a Christian, and I just remember looking at her and she was so happy. And there was something about that I was like, okay, well if that's how I get it, if she's happy and she's a Christian, maybe church is the answer. And that was kind of the catalyst for me to start looking at something bigger than myself. I remember becoming a Christian. I think I would have been about 16, and I remember feeling such a distinct difference from who I was and who I had become.
What did the church tell you, if anything, about queerness and the LGBTQI community? It's
so funny because I look back on this and I probably around 16 was constantly trying to like solidify my idea of what, I was like, okay, what is right, what's wrong? What does the Bible say about homosexuality? How do I, as a Christian, feel about people in the LGBTQIA+ community? And it's funny looking back on that now, being like, oh, the reason I wanted to know exactly where I stood was because it affected me. I grew up with the rhetoric, love the sinner, hate the sin. That it was, it's not right. If you do find out that you're queer in any sense, you don't act on it.
And when did things start to change for you? When did you question that and maybe take a slightly different path?
Probably wasn't until a couple of years ago, probably around the marriage equality vote, that, especially being in the arts and having a lot of queer friends, and just having that conversation. I remember having a conversation with a friend in New York at one point who found out I was a Christian, and he was like, do you hate me?
How did you sort of, reach a place where you weren't, feeling like internalized homophobia or anything?
Oh, still have internalized homophobia for sure. I think, it's hard to grow up in constantly believing that that's wrong and then, realize that that's also who you are and completely just pivot. It's been a journey, and I stepped away from the church for a little bit. And I say I stepped away from the church. I don't think I stepped away from God. And so I think it's, it's a constant journey, and it's still a constant, constantly coming out to people as well. I've moved around a lot. I've lived in a lot of different cities, and so it's difficult to just be like, public service announcement, I'm queer, just so you all know.
So I feel like some Christians will say, I accept the LGBTQIA+ community and we love them, but we just don't think that they should act on their desires. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's worse. I think I'd rather someone be like, nah, what you're doing is wrong. You're wrong. Maybe not. Okay, now that I've said that, maybe I don't. Maybe that's not better. I mean, sexuality, I think, is part of a person, And to me, I'm like, how different is that to being like, I accept you if you weren't black, you know? Like, it's cool, that is who I am though.
The Church's teachings on sex aren't just a tension point for LGBTQIA+ Christians. I'm meeting Rosario, a straight Catholic who's also struggled.
When it comes to sexuality, especially, I felt like it didn't make sense to me why I was always told don't have sex before marriage. Yeah, that sex was a bad thing. I was always like wanting love in my life. I believed that like everyone's purpose was to love and be loved and everything, but it was kind of like I think especially in the media, it's always portrayed through sex. By the end of year 12, I ended up like looking up at porn and everything, just because I thought, well, if I want love in my life, I need to educate myself, right? And I didn't get the education like anywhere else.
But porn wasn't Rosario's only sexual addiction.
Pornography came much later on in my life, but masturbation was actually part of my life since the age of 10. I just stumbled upon it and I just like, yeah, started going. So yeah.
Rosario's attitude towards sex and masturbation was tipped on its head after high school, when she went to an ethics talk by a Catholic academic.
It was this one sentence. So sex is the physical expression of love between a married man and a woman, and that ultimate unity creates a new life. For me, pornography didn't make sense anymore because of that, because it was like sharing something that should be between two people, pretty much. But when it comes to masturbation, that was much harder to make sense of. If I'm masturbating, of course, like one part is that it's kind of like mimicking sex, but the other part is that I felt like I was using myself for my own pleasure. It was pretty much like I was kind of disrespecting myself in a way.
Are you hoping to wait until marriage?
My hope is, but I can say like, even though I have recovered from my addictions, like it doesn't mean that it's like I'm a perfect human being. So I do fall over every now and then. One of the things that I really love about Catholicism and that anchors me to this faith is the message of mercy and hope.
To be honest, I'm pretty astonished that she told us everything. I feel like most people would not be comfortable sharing that, and it takes a lot of courage. I feel like one of the things that stood out to me was that for her, if you're masturbating over someone or having sex with them and you're not married, then you're just using them. And I kind of want to find out what a theologian would say about that. So I've lined up an interview in this church with an Anglican minister who's done her PhD on singleness and Christianity.
As Christians, we believe that God created sex to serve human beings in marriage, that it isn't just created as kind of this basic human need, but it's actually designed to serve a husband and a wife who are in a lifelong committed relationship to each other, to serve each other with their bodies, to bring about a new family in that context. And so it's not so much that we want to tick boxes and say you must do this, you may not do that. It's actually understanding what the purpose of sex is for.
And so using that framework, what would the church's teachings be on things like masturbation and using pornography, even if it's just for yourself?
The pornography industry is incredibly destructive. I think as individuals we're removed from that. We sit behind a computer screen and we think this is just what I'm doing in the privacy of my own home. In terms of loving other people well, the porn industry is the antithesis of that. Are we objectifying other people in our minds and our hearts for our own gratification? And you know, that's something that Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5. He says that if a man looks on a woman who is not his wife lustfully, he's committing adultery in his heart. So on the question of masturbation, there's a variety of perspectives from within the Christian community, from it's just a matter of physical release, it doesn't matter, you know, explore your own sexuality there, right through to the other end of the spectrum where some Christians will say there is never ever a place where that is appropriate. And then there's everything in between.
I guess for Christians who believe that sex outside of marriage or masturbation is not in line with their own beliefs, how are they meant to deal with their own sexual desires that most of us will get as humans?
One of the things that I looked at in my research is helping single Christians to see that actually abstaining from sex doesn't mean they're denying that they have a sexuality. Doesn't mean to sort of suppressing sexual urges as something that is just abnormal or something that they shouldn't be feeling, because that's actually how we've been created. The question then comes, well, what do we do with those sexual urges? How do we express them in a way that's actually appropriate?
How do you think the wider public views abstinence and celibacy versus how does the church view it?
There is often a sense that it's impossible for single Christians to live celibate lives. That's not the case. I know plenty of them who are. I'm one of them myself. We have very rich and fulfilling lives. Saying no to one good thing in life doesn't mean that your life is miserable by any stretch of the imagination. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's complex, sometimes it's sad. There are moments when it can be difficult. But it's not unrealistic, and it's certainly not a miserable life by any stretch of the imagination.